Hi, and welcome to the live series Straight Off the Bat. Join us on Thursdays as we speak to individuals from multiple industries who will help you understand financial literacy and education. If you're joining us from Facebook, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and follow our page to stay updated with content that helps you manage your money. I'm your host, Pauline Joseph, and today we're highlighting Child Sexual Abuse Awareness Month as we're discussing breaking the silence. Today we're joined by Keron King. He is a senior lecturer in criminal justice and at the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as Khadijah Pierre. She is an independent consultant who has worked extensively on issues of gender, child protection, and social development. Let's welcome our guests today. How are we today?
Hi, thank you for welcoming me. Pretty good. Good to be here.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
people don't know
Pretty
this,
good
but
as
it'll be
well.
great. So people don't usually do this, but I actually ask how you just to make sure the audio is good. So we're sounding fantastic. All right. So let's start with Khadijah. Can you share some insight on the partnership with the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago?
No problem. So in 2023, the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago partnered with the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the St. Augustine campus, UE. They joined forces in somewhat what I call a really remarkable partnership. The bankers themselves saw that the responsibility to address social ill, which is gender-based violence. In particularly, they approached the IGDS at that time. And so forth, they decided to both move forward with what we call the Break the Silence project, which addresses issues of CSA. Now, this project started in 2008 under the leadership of Emeritus Professor Rhoda Reddock, and it's an action research. What do we mean by that? It both had a communication campaign, advocacy campaign, along with research that would have informed the campaign moving forward. And out of this, we would have seen the development of a teacher's toolkit, which then developed into a bilingual toolkit that addresses CSA within Spanish speaking migrant communities within Trinidad and Tobago. Particularly, the Bankers Association has been a tremendous partner throughout the process of the project, and they have shown immense support for anything that the project has been doing thus far. I believe this is the start of something great, especially in terms of corporate social responsibility. And I think the bankers has set themselves as a great example of how they can engage in social issues within Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, thank you so much for sharing context for that, Khadijah, because I think that's important for us before moving forward to the heavier questions. So, we're going to head over to the man on the show today, Keron. So, we want to find out, what do men and boys understand when it comes to CSA?
Sure. So so we did these focus groups, right? We did 6 focus groups over what felt like a 6 to 7 month period. Um, 3 of them were children under 18, and 3 of them included 18 and over, so adult men. And surprisingly, or I should say happily, the vast majority of respondents understood CSA the way we want them to understand it, which is to say, it's sex between an adult and a minor, someone under 18, regardless of if consent was present. And that finding was good for us because, in large part, historically, if you go back 20 years or so, individuals may not have included the age component when thinking about CSA, or they might have simply think about it as forced sex, right? And not appreciate that if an adult is having sex with a minor, it is definitely sex. However, that is to say, we still see a few of the respondents had vacillating ideas around age. So whilst the majority had the 18 age as a cutoff, some respondents were saying things like, if there was consent, sorry, and the individuals maybe when they're high teens, initially they didn't initially see it as CSA, but after discussion and probe, people did agree that 18 and over is the cutoff. So I think we saw some positives in terms of how people define CSA, historically to now, but there still exist, although minor, individuals who don't immediately see CSA as occurring with individuals in high teens once consent is there.
Sorry, my mic was off. I was having a breakthrough there. So that's so interesting because it comes with data to back it up. Anything to add on to that, Khadijah?
I would like to add on in terms of that particular focus group research venture that we went on. This came out of one of the first panel discussions out of the project. And within that panel discussion, we sought to find out what is actually going on the ground, what are the capacity needs of the stakeholders involved. And that involves teachers, social workers, guidance counselors, persons within the courts, as well as those within the TTPS. And within the crowd were boys from the Queen's Royal College, from the She's Royal program. And they had asked us, they said, listen, the She's Royal program, by the way, in context, is a program that addresses issues of GBV as well as gender equality. And they said, listen, we understand it. We know why we are doing this, why we're part of this program, but we can't seem to get our friends on board. And we want to understand what is the pushback, what is the apprehension, in terms of getting our friends to understand that GBV is a problem for everyone and not just for women and girls. And it is from there we said, you know what, let us go into the field and figure out what are men and boys framing and understanding of CSC. How are they understanding this? How are they coming to the understanding of CSC? And how do they see themselves as allies in really addressing this social issue?
Thank you so much for that, Khadijah. So we want to look at some of the signs that people can look out for and identify when it comes to the CSA that folks may be experiencing. So, Karen, you want to chime in there?
Yeah, for sure. So it might be helpful to think about it is in on one hand as behavioral, immediate or drastic behavioral changes. So and this is well documented research, both locally, regionally, as well as on the international landscape as well. So sudden withdrawals from typical relationships, so persons get significantly isolated. Some researchers talk about a spur on of bedwetting, um, changes, dramatic changes in academic performance. Of course, telltale signs include physical signs, bruises on the body, and so on. So I like to think about it in terms of psychological and physical and behavioral, sorry. Um, but I want to give a caveat because oftentimes these symptoms can also indicate other types of abuses or other types of traumatic experiences. And I won't want your audience to feel that once they see this, it means it's a pointer to CSA, but it might be necessary to keep a watch to engage to engage your ward or so for further discussion. So I want to guard against any level of alarmist responses, but drastic changes both on the behavioral and psychological front might be necessary or needed to examine any future or possible traumatic experiences the person has undergone in that area.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I'm beyond embarrassment with this show because the audience know I share all this information. Because I did wet the bed till teenage years, and it wasn't based on what we're discussing on. It was other traumas, but the reality is, it's great to have somebody in your life that you could have those conversations with, which is super important.
Yeah.
So when it comes to this conversation, which we're obviously having to navigate in the social media space, how do men and boys frame grooming? And before we even go into that, what is grooming? Can we elaborate on that? Because as a word back in the day, it had a different meaning, but we're in a space now where we're looking and changing how we use our vocabulary. So let's identify first, Khadijah, what is grooming?
So, grooming is really an action in which, and in the context of what we're talking about, is when an adult is in somewhat a way showcasing preference to a child to get their trust. So it's like today I give you a sweetie, tomorrow I'll give you something that you really want. The next day I listen to you. I show that I care because in most instances, kids are generally vulnerable population as we consider them, and in other circumstances, in terms of like socioeconomic background and even in issues at home, they may feel left out. So this particular adult is now providing them with a space that they may feel safe, and that's where they start to build a trust. And it's upon getting this trust that then the adult, or we made the word perpetrator, would then go on to do SE or conduct any SE action towards the child. And because that trust is there, the child seems to be a bit confused because this is somebody who cares for me, this is somebody who does things for me. So technically they're not, and that there's this confusion that happens as well. And I invite Karen if you can add to that as well in terms of the definition.
Yeah, I thought your definition definitely was comprehensive. What I will add um, is that now in the digital space, we see examples of online grooming, right? Where individuals,
Mm-hmm.
and this came up in the research as well, with the focus group that Khadijah mentioned earlier, where individuals spoke about people sliding into their DMs and gaining trust through that means as well. And that was interesting, right? When historically, when victimologists and other gender scholars examine SA, we didn't initially think about the online space, right? But within the past decade or more, the online space or the platform is now being added as a way to groom. And because young people or digital natives feel so comfortable in the digital space, it's proving to be quite, unfortunately, proven to be quite effective as a space for perpetrators to groom our young children. So, there are people who look at the ways in which platforms, I don't want to I don't want to name any specific platform, right? But there are particular gaming platforms where people manipulate or monopolize the chat space to to groom. So that's the only thing I'll add, but definitely.
Wow, such important information for parents and the aunts and uncles to know about because relationships with children includes having conversations and difficult conversations. So we're going to go on a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by Kevin. We have a new guest as well, and we will continue the conversation around breaking the silence. We'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back to the live series Straight Off the Bat. Join us on Thursdays as we speak to individuals from multiple industries who will help you understand financial literacy and education. If you join us from LinkedIn, don't forget to like and follow our page to stay updated with content that helps you manage your money. I'm your host, Pauline Joseph, and today we're highlighting CSA, which is Child Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, and we're discussing breaking the silence. We're joined by Kevin Liverpool. He is a violence prevention practitioner with experience working with men and boys across the Caribbean and globally. We're also joined by Keron King, PhD. He is a senior lecturer in criminal justice at the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as Khadijah Pierre. She is an independent consultant who has worked extensively on issues of gender, child protection, and social development. So let's welcome back our guest today. So we want to make sure that Kevin's audio is good. How are we doing today, Kevin?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, well, we're
All
going to
right.
get straight into it because We do have a lot to cover. So, just before the break, we were discussing, what exactly is the term grooming, because it's something that has evolved over time. There's certain words that mean different things now. So, we want to go straight to Kevin and ask Kevin, how do boys and men frame or identify grooming if they've experienced it?
Yeah, thanks. And that's a really important question. And from the conversations that we had with the boys in the focus group, they were able to speak really openly about their experiences, whether firsthand or secondhand, around the discomfort they felt around adults when they felt that intentions were not in their best interest. So some of the boys were able to talk about that, which meant that they had an understanding that there is this process of grooming. Some of them did reference it, but even if they didn't know the term, they knew about that type of experience. And I believe a few of them would have also referred to knowing other young people who would have been affected negatively by it.
It's so interesting because this is requiring some difficult navigation when it comes to um one of the most important parts of society, which is kids. So when it comes to the legal implication of CSA, can we expand on that for folks to understand? Because I know earlier Khadijah mentioned the TTPS and different organizations that are part of these studies as well. So can we bring into the conversation the legal implications?
So I would say, in terms of legal implications, I want to make this very clear. In Trinidad and Tobago, we consider a minor person below the age of 18 in terms of providing consent. With that being said, anyone below that age who is engaging in any activity with someone who is significantly older than them is considered illegal. Um, I also would say it is mandatory for persons to report if they came across a case that they are sure, in terms of that this is a case of CSA, that this has to be reported. This will then be given to the TTPS. In certain circumstances, I know within the school context, they have their own processes, as in the child may come to a social worker, or the social worker may be informed, and from there, all parties from the TTPS has to also be involved in dealing with the situation. Also, we have the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, who is also another entity in the case where they themselves are involved in circumstances where CSA may occur.
Yeah, I'd
Okay,
like to, Pauline, if it's
sure.
fine, I'd like to just build a bit on that. And I think Khadijah is right in terms of the mandatory reporting. And I'd just also like to add that even if you're not sure as an adult, as long as you suspect that there might be
Mhm.
instance of child sexual abuse, as an adult, you have the responsibility
Mhm.
under to report it. And a kind of moral imperative as well, right? Like if you know a child is being harmed or suspect that this might be going on, it's important that you report it. And, it's also important that the process involved, which whether it means reporting it to the police or to Children's Authority, would also protect that person who is coming forward. Because sometimes with suspected cases, there could be, repercussions to the person coming forward. So also mindful of that kind of responsibility for the system to ensure that there are safeguards so that people feel confident to come forward with information, whether it's suspected or real. It's not on the adults to investigate to find out if it's true or not. Once there is suspicion that a child is a victim, then we as adults have that duty to report it.
Well, they do say it takes a village. Karen, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Pauline. I wanted to chime in as well because there's a sense in which individuals might feel timid to come forward to the justice system because yeah, many people have different experiences with the justice system and may wonder, as Kevin was intimating, may wonder the level of effectiveness. But I want to say that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has a pretty decent framework. They have a special victims unit within whom have a children's protection unit. And combining with the Children Authority, I want to encourage people, as Kevin is saying, make the report because we have the support from a point of view of law enforcement. Um, it is my experience as a criminologist that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service takes this very seriously through their child protection unit. Also, if people are worried about what support survivors of CSA might experience, again, TTPS and other spaces have support, so psychosocial support. So, for example, in law enforcement, they have a victims and witness support unit. I say this as a building on what Kevin is saying, that moral imperative to come forward with these issues. Um, Unfortunately, when we look at the statistics with violence against children, persons who hurt children the most, unfortunately, are those who are close to them, those who have built trust with them. So sometimes it needs someone on the outside to step in, so we can save and protect our children.
So important. And let's shift the conversation to the social cultural context because as we mentioned earlier, Karen was talking about digital natives because these folks navigating your phones way better than their parents. So when it comes to social cultural context, how do we determine how are we understanding as girls and boys, the children of today, how are they understanding CSA and other forms of abuse? Who wants to take a stab at it?
I probably could
Karen?
chime in first. Yeah.
Mhm.
I want to build on something we saw in the research with the boys and the men that we did a couple of years ago. Um, that speaks to the issue of the socio-cultural influences regarding girls and how it differs from boys. We asked the boys how what they think about a victim of I say when it's a girl who is the victim. And all the boys immediately, and even the men immediately express emotions like sadness, disgust, feelings of despair, wanting to help the girls, and so on. When we pose the same question, how they think about sexual abuse, when we think about um, boys as being the victims, many of our respondents struggled to come to a realization that to see themselves as victims. And that to me was a real surprising finding because they immediately saw when girls were victims of SA, they immediately see them, acknowledge them as victims. But when they themselves or their friends were victims of SA, they had a bit of a struggle. I communicate this within the overall socio-cultural context because it speaks to that issue of machismo, doesn't it? Because this idea of to be a boy is to be strong, to be a man is to be brave, and something like being victimized in this way, in some ways, challenges that idea of how they see themselves as boys and men. And I think that is something that we have to explore because it's a cultural thing, it's a socio-cultural thing. How they see themselves when they are indeed victimized, because it has implications for reporting, it has implications for help seeking activities. I know Kevin and Khadijah and I have chatted about this finding a lot. So I want to pass it on to them if they want to add or share anything additional on that issue of how they interpreted the difference in interpretation between boys and girls.
Thanks for opening that up, Keron. Some of the comments that came out when we asked the boys how would they respond if the victim was a boy or a man, you know, they said, if it was a friend of theirs, they would no longer be interested in being their friend, because for a boy to be a victim would mean that he wanted to be a victim, that he liked the act, that he didn't want to fight off the perpetrator. Like Karen shared, because they were looking at it through a masculine lens, it was all shaped on the ability or the perceived ability for boys to be strong and for boys to always be in control. Um, as opposed to what he described with girls, where the respondents said they would feel sorry, or even they expressed they would want to take revenge um, against the perpetrator. But when the script was flipped, the boys expressed a lot of disgust. Um, and that also would influence the type of care that we would provide, um, for those close to us, especially as boys turn into men, it would really influence the way they show up in terms of how they care for others who not only are victims of child sexual abuse, but just men uh, in general being vulnerable to sharing pain or hurt that they would experience.
Wow, such informative. I mean, literally my mouth dropped. That's amazing to hear and to learn how social cultural elements really define how we see things. So I saw also Khadijah shaking her head. So you wanna just close off the conversation there?
Yes, I just want to reiterate to the public, we have to be very mindful of how we are talking to our young persons. The We have a way we say in IGD as everything is it's gendered, from how we talk, from how we approach issues, from how we even make decisions in our lives. And for most part, the boys and the men are unable to articulate their feelings, or they are unable to be vulnerable because they've been taught that boys are strong, boys don't have emotions, boys don't cry. And yes, we've heard this time and time again, but it seems as if we are really not connecting to understand how deep this goes. Because then, in cases of CSA, where boys are the victims, how do they come forward? They feel a lot of shame. They feel a lot, like they can't come forward. People would laugh at them. So, the way we engage men and boys are wrong. What we quote unquote consider soft feelings of empathy and care, we need to be mindful of that, and we need to be mindful that everyone should be allotted that care and empathy, and that it's not just a boy thing or a girl thing. It's actually a people thing, and CSA is actually a people problem as well.
Wow, this is eye-opening because, growing up with Caribbean parents, there are a lot of things that are gendered, like emotions, and I could see how this will affect us as adults as well. So we're gonna go on a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue the conversation around breaking the silence. We'll be right back.
Tired of feeling lost when it comes to your money? Want to make your money work more for you? Then tune in to Straight Off the Bat, brought to you by the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Every Monday at 8:30 p.m. on TV6, right after the news. We'll give you practical tools and strategies to help you manage your money wisely, from budgeting basics, debt management, to wealth creation. We'll cover it all. No jargon, just straight talk. Join our host, Pauline Joseph, as she speaks to experts across the industry to empower you to take control of your money. Straight Off the Bat, Mondays at 8:30 p.m. on TV6. Brought to you by the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago.
And welcome back to Straight Off the Bat, a show that helps you understand financial literacy and education. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're doing so from YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe to continue seeing content that will help you manage your money. I'm your host, Pauline Joseph, and today we're highlighting CSA, Awareness Month, and we're discussing Breaking the Silence. Today, we're joined by Kevin Liverpool. He is a violence prevention practitioner with experience working with men and boys across the Caribbean and globally. We're also joined by Keron King. He is a senior lecturer in criminal justice at the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as Khadijah. She is an independent consultant who has worked extensively on issues of gender, child protection, and social development. So let's welcome back our guests today. We are covering a very heavy topic, and this is very important for us to have a discussion around. So, for those who may have missed it, I just want Khadijah to just give us a short insight into the context and the relationship with the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago and the research that has been done.
That's fine. So in 2023 or 2023, as we say, the Bankers Association joined forces, I like to say, with the Institute for Gender and Development Studies Central Austin Campus Unit to embark on a project called Break the Silence. Initially, the bankers themselves, as a group, decided that gender-based violence was an issue that they were seeing proliferating immensely throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and they wanted to seek a way and how can they help? How can they now help in terms of coming forward as a corporate entity to help with this social issue? So through the Break the Silence project, both the IGS and Bankers Association have been working collaboratively to conduct project initiatives. And in this project, we conducted a research in which we
Oh, I think we may be having a little internet issues there. So if you missed any of what Khadijah say, not to worry. This live show will be recorded on YouTube and LinkedIn that you can watch on the replay, as well as Facebook for a shorter period of time. So just when we initially started, Karen mentioned some research, and I think it's important for us to make data-driven decisions. When it comes to communication and coping strategies around the issue of CSA, what did the research reveal? Karen, you want to chime in there?
Sure. So there was something that came up that was very interesting to me as a father, not just as a researcher. So we were exploring with the boys and men around reporting and to get their ideas from their experiences, their lived experiences. If they or their friends are victims of CSA, who do they run to? And overwhelmingly, I want to say close to 100% of our respondents said that they prefer to go to their mother or their grandmother. The grandmothers played a real important role with regards to helping individuals deal with this trauma. And their actual words were things like they perceived their grandmothers as safe and warm, more understanding. Whereas when they thought about their fathers and their uncles in their lives as someone who they could turn to, they opted not to. They saw them as persons who might be disappointed in them. And that's a powerful truth, isn't it? Because it ties back into what we were saying earlier around how boys see themselves and how they construct their masculinity. If they see their victimization as something so damaging as it is, they don't want to be a further disappointment or to their or they perceive at least that their fathers will be disappointed in them if they say they were victims of CSA. Some participants even added that their fathers may respond with a sort of aggressive vengeance, right, and taking the law into their own hands to right the wrong. So these issues played on the minds of the boys when they are thinking about who to talk to. So mothers and grandmothers rose to the top of their list when they seek to cope with these experiences. And there are so many implications for this finding regarding not just reporting, but regarding how we think about parenting and advocacy work and so on.
Wow. That's really mind blowing. Kevin, you wanted to, I can see it.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, when we spoke to the boys, aunties were were central in how they would like to get support. Like Karen said, aunties, grandmothers, and mothers. I think that was the kind of general order in which they made they highlighted those in their lives, right? All women, um, and they also said that they won't go to teachers because they were concerned about confidentiality. Um, but what's really useful about that those responses was how it informs our work and how it challenges the kind of common sense approach we have to working with boys, right? Often we say that whenever we're designing programs for boys, that men ought to be the ones facilitating programs with boys. But actually, and this is supported by research elsewhere as well, the best environment for boys would be dual gender environments where you have a mix of male facilitators and female facilitators, where a program is run by both men and women, and boys could get to see that healthy balance. But boys could also know that they have this kind of support um, should they need it, right? So that's one of the areas that I think coming out of this research should help shape the way we design programs for boys and young men. The other bit that came out of the research was um, the way in which how creating a safe, confidential space for men and boys with the option for them to withdraw voluntarily and not have to give a reason why they would like to step out of the room or not answer particular questions. Creating that environment really caused the men and boys to open up, right? So it goes against that, that common notion that men don't speak, right? Or boys don't have anything to say or wouldn't talk or don't want to be vulnerable. I think once we are able to, and we didn't know the participants beforehand, so it wasn't based on any previous personal relationships, but it was really giving them the assurance that it was a safe space in terms of confidentiality. And if they felt uncomfortable with a question, they didn't have to answer it, or they could leave the room at any time if things got overwhelming. And creating that space really opened up the conversation and enabled us to collect this data and understand a bit more about how our boys and men were coping with child sexual abuse.
Just very fascinating information. So, Khadijah, you want to close off this conversation, this side of things? You're on mute there. Can you hear us? Oh.
Yes. I just wanted to follow up on what Kevin had said in terms of creating a safe space. So, through this project, we also realized that a lot of our stakeholders feel as though they don't know how to create safe spaces or what a safe space looks like. And most times, we really resort to just the infrastructure, a safe physical space, that there is emotional as well as psychological safety that has to take place. And when conducting preventive studies such as CSA or anything in terms of trauma, we have to be mindful that we have to leave space for persons to live as they wish and that it is not going to bring harm to them. Safety has to also include understanding the cultural context, making people feel comfortable taking away ideas of hierarchy. Because in this space, it wasn't Dr. Keron King, it was Karen. And we have to be mindful that, especially in Trinidad society, sometimes we walk into spaces and to rooms, especially when we're engaging young persons. We can't take for granted that they are considering our titles because in most cases, so we need to also be mindful of these things when we're talking about dealing with issues such as CSA and any other sensitive issue or traumatic issue within society.
Thanks so much, Khadijah. We're talking about one of the most vulnerable parts of society. So I think it's important for us to understand this is a place that we have to navigate and also have difficult conversations. So we're going to head over to the males in this conversation. And from your perspective, arising from the research, because this is coming out of real information that's local, can you reflect on the process of conducting these focus groups with other men and boys about CSA? So let's start with Kevin.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think it's really important for us to design processes that, are rooted in care. So it's not just about being extractive and just wanting information from boys or men, but even the process itself should be one that offers a degree of support, whether it's the way the sessions are created, the skills of facilitators, the physical design that Khadijah talked about and mentioned that sometimes that's probably the most important thing on some people's mind, but really going beyond that to ensure that the way we do the work, communicates to boys and men that this is more than just us trying to get information to publish something at a university. This is really about us caring about them as individuals and caring about the issues that they and their peers face and that we as men face, right? So for us in the space, it was really important for us to remove all the egos and the titles and the experiences and really be able to have those conversations in a non-threatening way, in a way that they felt comfortable. And as well as to provide opportunities, if they needed it, to further therapeutic or counseling support after, if the conversations became too heavy or if things triggered experiences in the past. So I think the idea in terms of designing these spaces and conversations must always be upon a foundation of care for those we are dealing with.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Let's head over to Keron.
Sure. Yeah, I could build on what guys are saying because when doing research, it's so tempting to see the persons you're interviewing as your subjects. I'm sure there are persons in your audience who may have done research methods or may have heard about research in the past. And there's this idea that the researcher is a researcher and the individuals he or she is speaking with are their subjects. And what we did in this particular focus group, as Khadijah mentioned earlier on, is an action research, right? So the persons we speak to, we see them as participants. We are in this together, trying to understand an experience that we are not totally clear on as well. And I think that approach opens a lot of doors. And I think it's something that CSOs and other researchers can model when dealing with issues like these. I'll tell you, when I started this project with Kevin and Khadijah, I too myself wondered, would men open up, right? We don't know them, as Kevin mentioned. First time we are meeting them, and you have in your own mind this mythology that men don't speak. Even the participants in our group, even they themselves said, well, men are not so emotional. But the experience demystified and debunked that because the average session lasted for about an hour, a little over an hour, and men were opening up, boys and older men, rural and urban, because we did it in rural areas, urban areas, we went across to Tobago as well, and men just opened up with their personal stories. Some of these things were not just cerebral and theoretical, people were talking about things that they went through. So that's one of the things, and just building on what Kevin mentioned. One thing I'll add though, and this has to be with me and how I experienced it. I mentioned it earlier a bit. As a father, hearing about the role of the digital space, that was something for me in coming out of the focus group. Hearing how these young men spoke about DMs and people sliding into their DMs with pornographic material, or going on particular websites to watch a movie because they don't have access to the paid versions of streaming sites. And when they go onto these illegal sites to watch movies, they are bombarded with illicit material. That was something that was like, as a father, reflecting on my son and my nephews and individuals in my life, I was like, wow, that's something other men and other guardians need to hear about what men experiences with CSA. So yeah, the focus group approach, I think it's excellent. I think it demystifies this notion that men don't want to speak. They do want to speak.
It's so interesting as you're talking, Karen, on this focus group. I would like to add my four brothers to this focus group because they have a similar uh, idea on emotions and gendering emotions and experiences. So it's so interesting to hear that this is something that we're all experiencing, especially with our family members. So we're going to go on our last break. And when we come back, we're going to continue the discussion around breaking the silence. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Straight Off the Bat, a show that helps you understand financial literacy and education. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're doing so from Facebook, don't forget to like and subscribe to continue seeing content that will help you manage your money. I'm your host, Pauline Joseph, and today we're highlighting CSA Awareness Month, and we're discussing breaking the silence. We're joined by Kevin Liverpool and Keron King, who I'm recently realizing I should be adding a doctor to the beginning of Keron King. My apologies, as well as Khadijah Pierre. Could we bring our guest in? Apologies, Karen. Like, I don't want to diminish all the work that you've done, right? So that PhD deserves the doctor. So we're kind of closing off this conversation, and we want to reflect on the process of analyzing the data from the research about men and boys, framing and understanding of CSA. So, we have spoken about what you guys have been doing with the research, but I want to ask Kevin, just give us a quick insight into the process of analyzing the data.
Yeah, so my role wasn't heavily involved in analyzing the data. But before I pass it over to Keron and Khadijah, who were more in that analysis trenches, one of the things I think we can do better, and maybe Keron or Khadijah will speak to it, is getting back to the participants once we've collected and analyzed the data, right? To say, like, this is what we heard, and just sharing that back with them and getting that sense. Of course, those are things that require funding and human resources in order to do those additional meetings. But I think it's an important step in the process, just to ensure that, we keep to that commitment of not just being extractive and taking from people, but we also give back to them as well.
Thank you for that, Kevin. So, Dr. Keron, as you the one to analyze the data, let's bring in your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, so when we looked at the data as a whole, a number of themes, as Khadijah mentioned, the report is still at a preliminary stage. One of our other researchers isn't here at the moment, but when we looked at the responses into a thematic type of thing, a number of things pop up, right? So we already begin to speak about masculinity and the ways in which boys see themselves as men, as being strong and brave and so on, and the ways in which that influences reporting, right? So that's another theme that kind of comes up when you look at the preliminary data, the barriers to reporting, right? Some of the older men, for instance, would say things like, I can't go to the police with that, when they're talking about their own victimization, right? The police might laugh. So there's still those notions around the response of law enforcement and how that inhibits reporting. Another thing we examined was persons' um, ideas around advocacy and justice for for victims of CSA, right? Um, Kevin mentioned that some of the boys said things that they wanted to take revenge, right? A kind of revenge approach, that they would go and do something to the perpetrator. A lot of the boys, when asked about what is the right thing to do from a justice point of view, were very punitive and very severe type of ideas around sentencing. And that is kind of commonplace, right? Oftentimes, when you do public surveys about how the society wants wants the government or the justice system to respond to this type of crime, they tend to be very severe. Um, a lot of boys, again, on the whole idea of advocacy, a lot of the boys mentioned they didn't even know of anyone in their communities, any males in their communities who were part of advocacy groups. So those are some of the initial preliminary themes that came out. And as I mentioned, there has been a generational shift where when we spoke to the older men, when they presented the sites for things like grooming and CSA, they spoke about the church, it happened in the church or the community, at school, and so on. But a lot of the boys did reference those sites as well, but they included, as I mentioned earlier, the digital landscape. So there's that shift being made as well. I want to add what is perhaps the most mind-blowing finding from the analysis that connects to the overall theme of masculinity. Very early on in the process, one of the groups, the first group actually, said that one of the reasons they don't report um, when boys are harmed through CSA is because they see themselves like a tool, or the same way you might see a soldier in an army. And being a victim of SA diminishes you so much that you can no longer fulfill this purpose, whatever the tool is. So think about a hammer is upon a nail. Some of the boys saw themselves not as a hammer, but they use that symbolism that they have to perform a function in society. The same way a soldier performs a function in an army, the same way a tool performs a function in a workman's tool belt, they must perform a function. And being victims of CSA so damages them that they are unable or incapable of performing that function. A kind of broken tool theory, if you will. And that to me, from an analytical point of view, was mind blowing. The ways in which they saw themselves overshadowed by ideas of masculinity and how it influences reporting habits or seeking help and that kind of stuff.
Wow, that's so interesting to learn. And it is a conversation that needs to be had nationwide in terms of how we look at masculinity. So, Khadijah, you want to chime in on the process of analyzing the data and the research about men and boys framing and understanding CSA?
Sure. So, in terms of the analysis, and I'm happy that Karen brought up the issue of boys feeling like tools. And this turns us back into social and the cultural ideas around what it means being a boy and a man in a Trinidad and Tobago society, and of course, the Caribbean and globally, right? I also want to tap into the idea around victimhood and how we tend to treat. Now, while the statistics show that girls and women are disproportionately affected gravely by gender based violence and CSA, we also have to be mindful of what are the ideas behind that. Now, the sensitivity and the empathy behind when we hear that a victim is a woman or a girl also stems from ideas of how we see femininity as weakness, as something to be protected, and so forth. And while we could be that is admiring. We have to really look at the root causes around these things. How our understandings are very gendered in terms of how we treat things, how we provide services. So, for instance, while there's this idea women and girls are treated more softly and so forth, while the men are, somewhat, they may feel a sense of shame and comeback because someone might laugh at them or may not take them seriously or may say, nah, that couldn't happen to him or so forth, which were certain ideas. So we have to also be mindful of those social cues and cultural cues that we make up, because even then, it also positions women and girls as inherent victims, which they are not. They are not inherent victims. So we have to be very mindful of how we talk to our kids, how we communicate. And I always say this is a people issue. We have to be mindful of persons' unique lived experiences and how they walk through life. But this is a human issue, and we have to treat it as such. Also, I want to touch base in terms of, and forgive me, I'm trying to connect my thoughts. Uh, when we talk about CSE, even in this context, we can't shy about it. We can't be shy. This cannot be a taboo anymore. We cannot think of this as a taboo. We have to continue to talk about it, because the shift that we're seeing, the understanding that we're seeing, the development that we're seeing amongst the boys and their understanding is because 10, 20 years ago, someone said, okay, let's talk about this very uncomfortable conversation. And I think talking about it is what is important. We cannot, as a society, continue to pretend that we can't say the S word, or it's uncomfortable, or this is too sensitive, and so forth. And rightfully so, it is heavy, but it's something that needs to be talked about continuously and engaged with continuously for us to really address it in an effective way.
Thank you so much, Khadijah. I think there's a lot of internalization we all have to do. We are about to close off, so I just want to ask the last question. We just have a minute to Kevin. Could you give us one simple strategy you think, and I say simple, obviously, this is not a simple conversation, but just a quick strategy on what you think we can do to encourage men and boys to join the movement against CSA and gender-based violence?
I think it's really important for us to approach this from a systems level and not just on the individual level. So institutions need, including the state, need to come together and design a national framework under which we would find the resources, equip organizations so that we're not working in silos, we're not working fragmented, but we have a very clear and shared understanding of how change would happen. So that's what I would put forward as probably the most important strategy, finding that overarching framework that would connect the work, whether it's locally or beyond, and investing in that.
And on that note, thank you so much to Kevin Liverpool, Dr. Keron King, and Khadijah Pierre for joining us today and sharing insight into breaking the silence. If you missed any of this, not to worry, it will be on a replay across social media, and you can sign up to be notified about our next live show in the comment section. As always, be sure to follow our pages across social media so you don't miss a single live show. And thanks again for joining us today. Looking forward to seeing you on the next show. Bye, everyone.